It's a very good morning to the Gelding. Gelding, we're back after a brief spell last week.
Good morning, Professor. Good morning, listeners. I apologise for my cough, Professor. Still hanging around. Yes, and Professor, we were sadly missed last week.
Yes,
when the show didn't go on. I got a text from Bretty Hogan, a follower of the show, just wanting to make sure everything was all okay. So I told him everything was fine. We just had commitments during the week, and yeah. Oh, excuse me, Professor.
I see you're using the That's Racing cup, Gelding there. They're very nice.
That's very nice.
Collector's item.
It is indeed. I think there's only 2 of them in the world, Professor.
I think that might be the case, Gelding, and you and I have got them. So
yes.
they'll be worth a lot one day.
Yes. So look, I told Brett we might catch up for a beer with him in the city one day, and it's always good to hear from our listeners, and hopefully we can find a couple of winners for him today.
Well, hopefully we can, Gelding, and let me know when you're going to catch up with him, because I wouldn't mind getting together with him as well, because it's been a while since I've seen him.
All right, you'll be first on the invitation list, Professor.
Thank you, Gelding. All right, races at Caulfield today, Gelding. Unlike in Sydney, only a 9-race card, so we're not being greedy here in Victoria.
Yes.
I might do a fair bit of the talking, Gelding.
All right, making me laugh. At least we're starting in the afternoon in Melbourne at 12 o'clock, and going till 5. But Sydney an 11:20 start, Professor.
Yes, Gelding. Far too early a start for racing, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
You know, that's a bit early to have your first glass of Chardonnay.
Is it? Oh, yes. What am I saying? Of course it is, Professor.
All right, the feature race, Gelding, the race 7, Group 3, Bletchingley Stakes over 1,200 metres, worth $200,000. The track's a good 4, although what we'd say to punters, the warning we usually give, take note of the conditions. Rain is forecast, so that track rating could be downgraded. The rail had an interesting 4 metres, Gelding, not 3, not 6, 4.
Yes, Professor, an interesting move, 4 metres. You don't hear of that too often, as you brightly pointed out. But as I said, it is a Melbourne racing club, so, we expect the unexpected from them. Interesting day, Professor. And look, a pretty disappointing field, you would have thought, in their main race. 7 runners, So, of course, there'll be no third dividend, but you would have thought for a $200,000 race, Professor, you would get more than 7 runners, but obviously not to be.
No, not to be, Gelding, at all. I was interested in that too. It's very rare that you get a feature race, certainly a Group 3, where it's only paying the first 2 runners.
Yeah, exactly, Professor. So maybe for Group 3 racing, they might have to offer a little bit more, you would have thought. But anyway, not to be. See, all the Sydney races, there are 160,000, Professor. So, you're getting a normal Saturday class race, and it's 40,000 under a Group 3. But then again, during the week, I did hear that Racing New South Wales, under Mr. Vlandis, maybe in a bit of or certainly the AJC, maybe in a bit of financial trouble, Professor.
Well,
maybe he's been spending their money.
Well, one thing we know, Gelding, if you're spending money, you've got to make money.
Yep.
And your intake has to exceed your outtake.
Yeah. And maybe that's a reason why they're having 10 races.
Could well be, Gelding, could well be. All right, what are your 2 best bets for today's Caulfield race meeting?
Well, look, I'm going with the theme today, Professor, with our tips. I'm looking at a few of not our current trainer, but more our ex-trainers, Professor. In the first, I certainly like number 2, Dom, trained by the Hayes boys and ridden by the jockey who is sitting second on the jockeys list at the moment, but seems to be in fine form in Blake Shin, just riding fantastically, Professor. So my first bet's race 1, number 2, Dom. This horse has had one start, Professor, by Piero, over 1,400. Professor had one run at Geelong Maiden. It was on a soft 7. So if we get some rain, I'm not worried about that, Professor. This horse over 1,400 down at Geelong. Won by 5.5 lengths ease down, Professor. So, yeah, that's a pretty good win. Blake Shin has decided to stick with the horse. So that's good enough for me, Professor. So my first bet of the day, hopefully getting the punters off to an early start, is race 1, number 2, Dom.
Can I just interrupt you there just for a sec, Gelding? And one thing, I think the threat to Dom is horse number 5, a local trainer, Phil Stokes. I am Velvet, a very good horse. But the interesting thing is that Shin rode I Am Velvet to its win, but he's sticking on Dom. So that sort of tells me, well, the jockey's making a decision about which horse he thinks is going to win the race.
I think Blake Shin might have got offers to ride all 8 of them, Professor. He's riding in such good form.
Something for the punters, Gelding, and our viewers would be I reckon a good bet to take the Quinella, number 2 and number 5.
I think you're spot on, Professor. Peter Stokes, a fine trainer, and Daniel Stackhouse, again, a leading jockey in Victoria. Both in the country and in the city, Professor. So, look, I think you can't do. Let's hopefully start off the day with Dom, and then going to the main race, the Bletchingley Stakes, Professor. Sticking with Recommendation, a horse we backed 2 weeks ago when it won, Professor. It careered away from them. Look, I know it's a bit short, Professor. We got better odds last time, but look, I just think we're here to try to find winners for our listeners. Look, I think Recommendation, I can't see why it can't win again today, Professor, over 1,200 metres. Officially, they said it only won by 4.7 lengths. A similar field it meets today. I would have thought it was closer to a bit over 5 lengths, Professor, east down. I just can't see any of these turning the tables on Recommendation, Professor. So mine are race 1, number 2, Dom, into race 7, number 2, Recommendations. And I will certainly be having a little parlay on them, Professor. And you like?
Yeah, Gelding, I'm taking the race after you, the Melbourne Racing Club Chairman's Handicap. It's a 2-year-old open race over 1,200 metres. In this race, Gelding, I like horse number 1, El Dolfito, coming out of barrier 8. It's only had the one start for the win, Gelding, so 100% win and place rate. It won at Flemington 3 weeks ago on a soft 5, so I thought I looked at that, and, well, if there's a bit of rain, that good 4 might become a soft 5. So, and it beat the more fancied I Found You by about half a length. It's won over the distance, and the threat to it, Comanche Miss, also trained by Phil Stokes, Gelding. The El Dolfito's sectionals in the race are better than the favourites. So
no.
I looked at that and I thought, well, there's only one question I've got, Gelding, and what might that be? The jockey.
Isn't he your jockey?
Well, I did, yeah. Anyway, but what I've got to say is he's in career form, Gelding. Lukey Nolan, 13% for his career, but over the last 50, he's riding at 16%. So I've got to take that into account. And also I've gone for our trainers, Gelding. I've found in favour of them, Moody and Coleman.
Very good, Professor.
They're doing a great job with Savvy Rocker. So why wouldn't they be doing a great job with El Dolfito?
Exactly, Professor. Maybe one we might have we haven't heard whether we've gone against El Burrito, have we?
No, we have not. But what I like about Moody and Coleman, you know how we talk about the Blue Army and how they pick their races.
Yeah.
Having been privy to what the trainer says about our horse, Gelding, I like the way he goes about his thought process of picking a race.
That's right, Professor. But and I suppose when they've got that, in contrary to other trainers that I know, but having the luxury of, like, you know, he's had like he must have 20 to 40 2-year-olds down there, Professor. Yeah. He seems to pick the mark for them, doesn't he? And he says he makes them earn their spots. You know, he doesn't run them in those races because he can enter them in there. He races them where we thinks he can win.
Exactly, you know, Gelding.
Like we've been in at Savvy Rocco. How many times for Flemington, Professor?
I'm sorry, Gelding?
How many times we've been in it for Flemington races?
A number. How many times have we started?
Yes, that's right. And, you know, the horse has had 3 starts for a win and a second, and is now a city placed horse. So that's just good placing.
Yeah, all right. So in race 2, my tip is number 1, El Vito. My second choice, Gelding, is in race 5, the Stowe Storage Solutions Handicap, a 3-year-old open race for fillies over 1,100 metres. I like in this one, Gelding, horse number 7, Amarasira, coming out of barrier 10. Only had the 2 starts for 1 win, 50% place and win rate. Won her maiden very impressively at Pakenham, Gelding. I had a look at that one during the week by 3.5 lengths. Then it ran in the Group 3 Peter Legrand Stakes at Caulfield. It was beaten nearly 4 lengths by the winner, but pulled up lame, Gelding. So I think that's a forgive for that race.
Forgive.
The winner of the race, Gelding Estrella, has since won the English Sprint. It won the Sunlight Classic, and it was 5th in the Group 1 Sangster. So if it's only beaten nearly 4 lengths when it pulls up lame by a horse like that, I think I'm going to look at it very closely in a race like this.
Oh, Professor, I like your thought process, and again, another former trainer of ours.
Yes, Mick Price and Michael Kent Jr.
Yes, and as you well know, Mick, again, you know, you've got to earn your spot to be running in the city with him. He just doesn't run them in the city for no reason. So I like your theories, Professor. It makes a lot of common sense.
Yeah, and Jai McNeil's in the saddle. He's a very proven commodity as a jockey. $3.80 and $1.55, Gelding. So there's a little bit of value there.
Beautiful. So I do like your value tips, Professor. Mine are a bit short today, but you've added some value in there.
Hopefully, Gelding. So my selections are race 1, El Dolfito, race 2, horse 1, El Dolfito, race 5, horse 7, Amarasira. Now, let's go to the Professor's Parlay. We should recap 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Because we weren't on air last week. Recommendation, won very handsomely, Gelding. Sydney beat North Melbourne. How did Melbourne without Max Gawn beat Essendon? So how good are Essendon, Gelding? I think that says a bit. I think Melbourne's win says more about Essendon than Melbourne.
Yes, and I think the form was followed up last week, Professor.
I don't think Essendon will make the finals, Gelding.
Well, yes,
they're teetering. They've been in the top 4 all year until the last couple of weeks, and I think they might just fall out.
Reminiscent of last year, Professor.
Very much so, Gelding. And last week we got the football legs up. Port Adelaide beat Richmond, Carlton beat North, but Cadmus a little bit disappointing, Gelding, I thought.
Yes, very, Professor. Just didn't show anything. Was expected to go a little bit better than that.
Well, and normally we could at least on occasions excuse the horse because the jockey, loses his way or, can't find the compass. But
no, this was all horse.
Yeah, when we expected the horse to go and it had the chance to go, it didn't.
Do you like the new saying, Professor? It performed under market expectations.
Yes. And so and that caused our parlay to perform under market expectations, Gelding.
Especially under our expectations.
Exactly. So we're still above 50%, but just, Gelding. We're 15 from 29 since the start of the year.
Let me just mention something, Professor. You'll like that. I was having a look at a betting website during the week just to see how the Professor Parlay goes against this crew. And this is a mob that's been around for 20 odd years and does a lot of advertising and pumping their own tyres. And they're talking up their systems that's returning a percentage rate of 28.7%, Professor. And as I said to you, that's just, they're spruiking that they're picking, basically just under 30% win rate. So that's three bets out of 10, Professor, and they're claiming that is a good system. Here we're running with a horse and 2 other sporting events, and we're batting 1 and 2.
Yeah, so our percentage rate at the moment, Gelding, 51.7. I just calculated it then.
Yeah, Professor, as I said to you, it's a sensational rate. And as I said, these other betting sites, if you're on a 30% win bet, just on the horses, you're doing well. So you're doing a fantastic job in your picking, even though sometimes you have given me worries with the soccer, the English soccer.
Well, we're not on the soccer today, Gelding. All right, so today's Professor's Parlay, the agreed bet of the day between you and I, Gelding, is race 7, horse 2, recommendation for all the reasons you mentioned in your quite erudite summary. And let's parlay that into the NRLW's back, Gelding.
Oh, you do well in the NRLW, Professor.
Well, I saw a cracking game on Thursday night, Gelding. It was absolutely cracking game. Just one out of the blocks. I just enjoyed it. It just had they had nearly as big a hits as they do in the men, Gelding.
That of the women's sport in Australia, and they're all growing and they're all fantastic and that, but is the NRLW the highlight of women's sport? There's no difference between watching, well, I know the giraffe will probably kill me here, but their quality is that high that, it's rivaling the men, Professor.
It certainly is, Gelding. It certainly is, and it's enjoyable. And it's a great thing to watch. Anyway, I better truncate what I'm going to say here because the first game that I'm talking about starts at 11 o'clock. So as soon as we finish here today, Gelding, I'll be off to get the bets on. I've set myself a bit of a task. So the first selection is Cronulla to beat the North Queensland Cowboys, although I don't know how Cowboys can be the NRLW. Surely North Queensland have to look at what their logo is for and what they're calling themselves.
Yeah, there'd be nothing wrong. And look, I know gender bias these days is, like there's no more chairman and chairwoman. Sometimes a woman can be a chairman, or now even down to called a chair and all that. But I wouldn't think there was anything wrong if they were called the North Queensland Cowgirls.
No, that's right.
I don't see that as being a sexist type of thing or anything like that.
Well, they are the Cowgirls, aren't they?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, Professor, but
or they could go for the Gelding. They could go for the all-inclusive North Queensland Cow People.
Yeah. As long as they don't shorten it to just the New South Wales
Cows.
The North Queensland Cows. That's only said in humour, Professor.
Exactly, Gelding. All right, so the line in this, Gelding, is 12.5, so it's more than 2 converted tries. That'll do me. Currently showing $1.23, and we'll parlay that into the Brisbane Broncos. And I think Broncos is also a male derivative, Gelding, so we might have to look at the Broncettes.
Yeah.
To beat the Parramatta Eels. And the line in this one is 13.5, so it's even more than two converted tries, and that's $1.17, Gelding. So the win parlay is showing 2-1, so it's a a very nice return on investment. So it's recommendation into Cronulla Sharks into the Brisbane Broncos.
Yes, Professor, and we do say to the listeners, as you mentioned earlier, watch the early races, and if rain comes, watch the pattern.
Yeah, exactly, Gelding. All right, well, listen, you better rug up, Gelding, and might need another trip to the doctor, I reckon, to get rid of that troublesome cough.
Yeah, Professor, unfortunately, but anyway, we'll see how we go.
All right, so until next Saturday, and that's racing, it's good luck.